Today we're talking about the movie In the Gray. And before we get into In the Gray, I want to talk about the director, Guy Ritchie. The reason why Guy Ritchie matters personally to me, I associate this director with what has made me always love movies, filmmaking, and storytelling. He is inventive, creative, and the guy is just a lot of fun with everything that he does. My first introduction to Guy Ritchie was in high school, and I remember with his first movie that came on the scene, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Now, that movie had come out before I was in high school, but that was where I was first introduced to it, and I loved that movie, not to mention his follow-up movie, Snatch. Both of these movies launched him onto the scene and got my attention and made me want to follow him ever since. And both of these movies, especially let's start with the very first one, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, introduce us to actors like Jason Statham and Stephen Graham. Ritchie has been a fun director to follow, and he's definitely had varying phases in his career. The launch phase would be the amazing first two movies, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels as the first film, and then followed up by Snatch. But then for a moment, the car kind of veered off course and almost crashed. This I want to call the Madonna era. If you all remember the movie Swept Away, this is another Guy Ritchie movie he made. It's a remake, and it's kind of a mess. It doesn't feel like Ritchie at all. So see it or please don't. Then we have the kind of almost fully recovered phase, and that's with the next two movies, Revolver and Rock'n'Rolla. But where we really see Ritchie hit his stride again is when he enters the studio phase. And that would be with Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, and then the sequel, Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows, and then I would argue King Arthur. Now look, for whatever reason, the box office on that movie didn't land, but the creativity of King Arthur got the attention of people in the industry because that was followed by Aladdin. And talk about having some balls to try to remake such a classic with Robin Williams and a Disney gem of a movie. In the place of Robin Williams was Will Smith as the genie, and the movie worked. It was a big hit, billion-dollar movie. Ritchie's career went into the stratosphere. And you can look at his run now, for example, just with shows. He has The Gentlemen, which, by the way, he made a movie before in 2019, which was really good. But this Netflix series was next level awesome. Then he had the Paramount Plus series Mobland and the series Young Sherlock. And at this point now, we're caught up to In the Gray. When you watch this guy's work, you can tell he absolutely loves what he does. But that doesn't change the fact that if you stretch yourself thin, weird shit happens and sometimes your movies just don't land. And that might be why problems like movies In the Gray happen, problems that didn't have to happen the way they did. But a thing that I want to point out is that even when Ritchie has a bad movie or a good but not commercially successful one, there's always something captivating in them. His style, energy, action, the cast he picks, the team he keeps collaborating with, still there's always something fun with all of that. And then as for a run-through on the details of this film, it's called In the Gray. My rating on it is a 6.5 out of 10, but I'm going to save the full thoughts for a little bit later. Guy Ritchie wrote, directed, and co-produced this movie. The producers on this film, besides Ritchie, are Ivan Atkinson. Ritchie and Atkinson have the film banner film production company Tough Guys Films. There's also John Friedman and Dave Kaplan. The additional companies that were involved in the production of this movie were Black Bear International and C2 Motion Group. As far as the lead cast, you have Isa Gonzalez, who plays Rachel Wilde. You have Jake Gyllenhaal, who plays Bronco, and Henry Cavill, who plays Sid. For the supporting cast, you have Rosamund Pike, Fisher Stevens, Carlos Bardem as Manny Salazar, and then for the crew, for a cinematographer, we have Ed Wilde, who also shot Ritchie's movie The Covenant and The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The editor is Martin Walsh, Oscar winner for the movie Chicago. He also cut the movie V for Vendetta. This is Ritchie's go-to production designer, Martin John. This guy is a frequent Ritchie collaborator for movies like Wrath of Man, The Covenant, and the Netflix series The Gentlemen. The runtime for the movie is 1 hour and 38 minutes. It's rated R. The budget, so far, it's been kind of a weird thing because there isn't exactly a consistent number. I've heard of a range as low as 40 to as high as 70 million. And even though he and his producing partners made this as an independently produced action film. His movies now have evolved to be a little bit more expensive, which is kind of strange because, again, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch were actually creative and inventive because they had a little bit of a smaller budget to them, but we are where we are. So I'm going to assume for this movie In the Gray, we're at a $60 to $70 million budget range. Another interesting detail would be how and when this movie was filmed, which is, by the way, not a very long production schedule, especially for a Guy Ritchie movie, but we'll get back to that in a moment. What else happened in 2023? Do y'all remember that? That would be both the writer's strike and actor's strike of 2023. What is interesting here is that this movie was able to secure a SAG-AFTRA, these are the acting unions in the industry, this movie was able to secure a SAG-AFTRA interim agreement, so they were able to still film. The release date of this movie, of when it finally came out in the United States theatrically, was May 15th, 2026, after having its release dates pushed many, many times. And let's talk about its distribution path. This movie originally was going to be released in the United States by Lionsgate, which had secured the US rights from Black Bear International. The movie was originally slated to release in the United States theatrically January 17th of 2025, but then it was pulled, it was reshuffled to different dates. Eventually what happened was Black Bear Pictures took the film back and they directly distributed the movie in the United States. But Lionsgate still retained the rights for digital and pay TV. And now we're going to get into the pros and cons of In the Gray. Starting with the cast, Eiza Gonzalez. She is in everything right now, and I love that. She's in Three Body Problem, the series on Netflix, Hobbs and Shaw, the Fast and Furious spin-off movie, which was, by the way, a lot of fun, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, so she worked with Henry Cavill before, as well as director Guy Ritchie. And one thing with Eiza Gonzalez is that she is a repeat Ritchie collaborator, especially recently. You have Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, the Apple TV Plus movie Fountain of Youth, and now you have this movie, In the Gray. And then you have Jake Gyllenhaal, who also worked with Guy Ritchie before in the movie The Covenant. And then for Henry Cavill, this is the third collaboration between Guy Ritchie and Henry Cavill. The first movie was The Man from U.N.C.L.E. The second was The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Again, that has him working with Eiza Gonzalez. And now this movie, In the Gray. But this is the first time that all three of them are working together. Rosamund Pike and Fisher Stevens have really fun supporting roles in this movie. Fisher Stevens especially, that was really unexpected. I always associate him with the hit HBO show Succession. He is hilarious on that show, and he's pretty great here too. Carlos Bardem as the villain Manny Salazar. Carlos Bardem, by the way, is Javier Bardem's brother. And of the three leads, Eiza Gonzalez is easily the most fun in this movie. She is bringing a lot of charisma, and she is not phoning this in. Other positives include the usual Guy Ritchie machinery and style, the usual great action, amazing, really amazing global locations in this movie. The typical kind of heist and planning and coordinating strategy that you usually get in a Guy Ritchie movie. Still fun here and very cool. Chris Bensteed is back, the composer of Guy Ritchie movies. In fact, they've worked on over 9 projects if we're going across films and shows. The editing and pacing of this movie are really fun. It has the usual Ritchie tone, the kinetic energy. It's slapstick. It has a goofball comedy feel sometimes, but then it can kind of flip back into that serious register when it needs to be. And overall, the movie still has its captivating moments. And another detail that does continue in typical Guy Ritchie fashion is that you have a lot of these smaller supporting roles and faces that you will recognize from his other work. He absolutely does have a regular list of cast and crew that he works with very frequently. And now onto the cons. First, a compressed production schedule. This movie was shot in roughly 2 months, from September to late October 2023. And that's really unusual for this director. His movies would be at least a 3 to 4 month shoot. Again, that's at a minimum, not counting for post-productions and, the reshoots. 2 months is really strange. Then, of course, there is the strike-era production, so it's made during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. The production was able to get the interim waivers to film, but having to make a movie during this environment of 2 strikes happening at the same time doesn't make anything any smoother. And then there's the issue of the reshoots. The trio of the leading cast, their schedules get really busy. Gyllenhaal's busy. Henry Cavill being in everything. He's in Highlander right now, and of course he gets injured during pre-production. And of course, Isa Gonzalez, who is having a great moment in her career, and she is working and is everywhere. So as for the reshoots, they either didn't happen or happened on such a small B-team pickup scale that the necessary fixes were never there and never landed. And in this movie, it shows, especially the ending. It feels like something's missing. Like there should have been more, I don't know if it's supporting shots or things explained further. It would have helped the ending wrap up a little bit more nicely and neatly, or at least in a way that could be understood better. Now, one thing which has always been a bit of charm in the Guy Ritchie movies is that every now and then there will be on-screen text like scribbling, and usually it's there to add some fun to it. We've seen it a lot in the movie and the series The Gentlemen, but in this movie, In the Gray, there was way too much on-screen text as far as like scribbles and explaining, and it came across more and more as the movie went on, like, okay, they're doing this to help hide some of the issues that the movie itself has. And then there's not much of a story. Now, this movie has a running time of 1 hour and 38 minutes. I don't think anybody these days would have a problem with a 2-hour movie, especially when Chris Nolan every time has to give us a 3-hour marathon. The extra runtime here to 2 hours, if those reshoots had happened, it could have rounded this into a complete movie, as I had mentioned before. The plot is also really confusing at some points, but here is the main issue that I have with this movie. At no point do you ever feel like the protagonists are in any real danger. This is becoming a bit of a trend for Guy Ritchie's more recent movies. Let me give you the 3 films I'm talking about here. Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, a covert mission, they're outgunned, outmanned, and yet the team never feels like they're under any real threat. And they're facing Nazis. That's one weird thing. Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre. A really fun movie. I liked it more than In the Gray, and arguably a bit more than even Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. But Statham, again, feels kind of unstoppable, and you don't really worry about him. And for the movie In the Gray, it absolutely has that same issue. There never is a real feeling of danger for these protagonists. And when you have something like that, there's just no stakes and no reason for you to really care. Let me give you an example from In the Gray without there being too much of a spoiler here. At several points in the story, the courts and the legal system get manipulated so swiftly and easily that nothing institutional ever pushes back. It's the same kind of problem. There's no real obstacle, no real feeling of friction. Now compare that to Tom Cruise and a Mission Impossible movie, right? His character and his team's characters, you can see and feel when they are in danger. There is always some sort of stake to care and to attach yourself to. Ritchie keeps deflating himself of this kind of tension in his own movies recently. I don't know why. Before, that was not the case. He was much better at that before. Again, see the movie The Gentlemen. And then I want to come back to that part where I was talking about the main leads, and I had mentioned before that Isa Gonzalez of the 3 is having the most fun here. Sid, played by Henry Cavill, and Bronco, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. They're these tough guys, they're skilled, they're kicking ass, but their characters are dialed way down, like they were told to, or chose to. Don't go over the top. Don't look too scared. You've seen this all before. I didn't buy it. I wanted to see that they were still human, a little scared, a little under pressure. It would have actually added to the adventure and even the campy humor that Guy Ritchie usually has, that kind of slapstick quality. And I'm hoping this doesn't become a regular thing. Both these guys have been great in previous Guy Ritchie movies. Gyllenhaal was amazing in The Covenant, and Cavill was phenomenal in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And now we have to get to the issue with how this movie was actually released. Lionsgate gave the U.S. rights back to Black Bear, the original investor and production house, towards the end of 2025, and then Black Bear self-distributed the movie theatrically in the United States, while Lionsgate still retains the digital and pay TV rights. But here's how the release date had been pushed and pushed. First January of 2025, then April 2026, and finally May 15th, 2026. But that also means that marketing was slim to none until the final week or two, when a quick kind of social media campaign kicked in. But still, hardly anyone in the States knew that this movie was coming out. How is that possible when you have these 3 amazing lead actors, this really fun director? Almost no one knows that a Guy Ritchie movie is coming out? The marketing silence pretty much just telegraphed that they knew what kind of movie that they had on their hands. So after all of that, I'm going to come back to my rating, a 6.5 out of 10. The one caveat is that to every Guy Ritchie movie, including this one, there's always some part of it that is rewatchable, and this movie has that. It just doesn't feel like that much of a movie overall, which is a really weird thing to say. As far as where to watch and the availability, it's in theaters now. In a few months, it will be available on home video. It has its fun parts, it has its problems, but still, it is a bit fun. If you see it, though, I want to ask one thing of you, listener. Can you please help me understand the ending? The very last scene. I was thoroughly confused. The ending also just kind of drops, which I didn't love, but it is what it is. And to close out, I want to talk a little bit about Guy Ritchie's upcoming slate. He's still making tons of movies. I do feel like he's spreading himself too thin, and In the Gray is an example of that. There is still more to see of his work, though, in 2026. We have season 2 of The Gentlemen on Netflix. That series is so much fun. I really enjoyed the first season of The Gentlemen. And then there is the movie Wife and Dog. It's coming out October 23rd, 2026. Rosamund Pike from this movie is returning for that film, along with Benedict Cumberbatch, Anthony Hopkins, and Cosmo Jarvis. He's from the series Shogun. Amazing series also, by the way, on FX. And then there is the movie next year coming out called Viva la Madness, which Ritchie is writing and directing. And again, it has him reuniting with Jason Statham. This makes their 6th collaboration together, and these are including the following films: Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels from 1998, Snatch from 2000, Revolver from 2005, Wrath of Man from 2021, Operation Fortune Ruse de Guerre 2023, and now Viva la Madness. And just a little interesting thing with this movie, Viva la Madness, it is based on J.J. Connolly's novel, which is a sequel to Connolly's Layer Cake, the 2000 novel that became Matthew Vaughn's 2004 film with Daniel Craig. That role is often credited with helping land Daniel Craig the James Bond gig. And there's a few notes of getting the Layer Cake movie history right. Matthew Vaughn directed it, and the producer credits are Adam Bowling, David Reed, and Vaughn himself, with Stephen Marks as executive producer. But here's the connection that Ritchie has to that movie. Ritchie and Matthew Vaughn co-founded SKA Films together in 1997, and Matthew Vaughn produced Ritchie's movie Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and the movie Snatch. One more note too, Ritchie was originally attached to direct the movie Layer Cake himself, but then had to bow out. And Matthew Vaughn took the chair, making his directorial debut. Viva la Madness is actually being billed as a standalone movie. It's not a direct sequel to Vaughn's film. Production already started in London in early 2026, with an expected 2027 theatrical release. In the Gray is in theaters now. As you can tell, I kind of have some mixed feelings on it, but it is still a fun movie. I mean, Guy Ritchie movies, they're just always a load of fun. Check it out. Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like it, share it, and leave a review. It really does help the program. And as always, thank you for listening.